That's why I think too, innovation leaders are some of the best people I've ever worked with, because it takes fortitude to sort of get through that. And they're change makers. Failure rate when it comes to innovation initiatives is still so high. It's like 80%. And yet organizational leaders want innovation today more than ever. The shocking thing, I think, in fact, most organizations know that they have some kind of issue when it comes to alignment. Alignment is also kind of a fancy word. Really, it's just like, how do we get everyone on the same page? Why this happens? Why is it a struggle? And there's kind of three places that we're looking at least. The first is
This is an Hour of Innovation podcast, and I'm your host with Lyoshin. Josh Folk joins me today to discuss the problem of strategic alignment in an innovative way, how his team is helping solve it. Welcome, Josh. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Vit. Yeah, happy to be here and excited to be a part of what you're doing. I've, tuned into some of your previous podcasts, and you always have some great guests. And so, yeah, thank you for sharing our stories.
Yeah, that's great. Glad we could make it. So before we jump in, could you please tell a little bit about your journey and background and what you're trying to do with the StratRocket?
StratRocket, yeah, sure. Yeah, well, my story starts, so today I live in Northern Virginia, just outside of DC, actually quite close to you, other side of the river. But my story begins on the other side of the coast of the United States, actually. I grew up in a suburb of Seattle, and I would say, sort of, lower middle class. And my dad was a mechanic, and he was just always in the garage, working on cars when I was growing up. And he bought us he bought us a computer one day, and he said something to the effect of, "I never want to see you in the garage or learning how to fix cars. I just want to see you learn as much as you can about this computer." And I think it was part of his way of saying, I want you to have more opportunities. And so that was really special for me. And as a result, created a lot of learning opportunities and opened up quite a bit of doors. Also growing up in that area, right, there's startups everywhere. And of course, there's stories about Microsoft and Starbucks, and just, so it was an area where you grew up and you just, saw ideas go from, the beginning to something very, very big. And I was always fascinated about that. And specifically growing up, seeing that as, again, a way to create more possibilities for yourself in your life. And so even to this day, going to a Starbucks and sitting down and opening up my laptop or, brainstorming something is just super exciting, for me. And then, so I went to school at the University of Washington. I studied entrepreneurship there. And then I got out into the real world and worked for a few startups. And I realized, it's actually not that easy. It's not all Bill Gates, and that was challenging, but it's something that's just always been in my DNA. One thing led to another. I ended up moving out to the Washington, D.C. area, and I ended up with a pretty cool opportunity to build a company called IdeaScale, which was focused on innovation and specifically working with innovation leaders and teams in all different organizations to help them overcome barriers related to innovating faster and better. Mm-hmm. And so that was really neat, taking a look at what some of those barriers were when it comes to like silos across the organization, or you have, one team doing this and another doing that, where if you just create, a pathway for them to connect and discuss or, sort of orient with each other, you can actually elevate, both teams' work or get closer to solving the problem. Diversity of thought and perspective was another barrier, and that's kind of where culture comes into play, and building a culture of innovation, one in which everybody can participate. So, that was a valuable sort of insight for me in terms of how that type of connection or silo busting can really create value and help accelerate change inside of organizations. They were also awesome customers to work with. So if you know anything about innovation leaders, they are gritty. Oftentimes they're taking kind of a chance, right, in their career. Innovation teams, they don't stick around forever, right? It's common where companies will get really excited about kind of spinning up a innovation team or effort, and then after a few years kind of decide to change the strategy. And so it's a problem, and it leaves these leaders then having to figure out what's next. And if you're listening and you've been on one of those teams, I always say, I know the scars, right? I know the battle scars, if you will, because I've worked with them in those environments for I left in January, so over 12 years. But getting to StratRocket, so I left in January, and I was really interested in sort of some of the AI stuff that was coming out. And as good of a job as we did on the innovation space, I still saw quite a bit of complexity and just kind of time suck stuff, So for example, figuring out how do we leverage these innovation capabilities? Where is the company trying to go? Are leaders aligned on that? And how do we connect our innovation efforts, with that? That takes a lot of work. Some leaders are very good at clarifying, what those things are. And then other times innovation leaders have to go to those corporate leaders and try and pull it out of them, or go to different departments and try and figure out a way to mesh it all, together. There's other busy work like communications. Like if you're going to ask employees for their ideas, you have to start to frame what the problem is in a way for them to participate. That takes work. Once you get the ideas in, you're having to evaluate them based on certain criteria that you have to come up with, which could be different depending on the desired output. And then finally, once you have the ideas that you're looking for, you got to find places in the organization where you can go and hand those ideas off to with resources and a desire to do something with them. And so if you just think about, each one of those things, like starts to add up after a while, which is kind of why I mentioned the scars. And that's why I think too, innovation leaders are some of the best people I've ever worked with, because it takes fortitude to sort of get through that. And they're change makers, so they wouldn't want to be doing anything otherwise. But so I started to look at, interesting. Some of these new AI capabilities potentially could reduce some of that complexity. Maybe, we start something there. I ended up meeting my now co-founder, John Knapp, in May, June. And he was looking at some of the same things. He's in Silicon Valley related to innovation and decisioning, which is a big component, right, to successful innovation. And I remember a study came out actually right around the time that we were joining forces that was quite eye-opening. I wish I could remember what it was. I can get it to you. But it was this, it was a paradox about how innovation, how the failure rate when it comes to innovation initiatives was still so high. It's like 80%. And yet organizational leaders want innovation today more than ever. So we were looking at that and saying, back to what I was, the complexities too that I was sharing earlier, and thinking, okay, well, what if we go back and sort of tackle some of that with fresh start, right? Using AI as part of the solution. And so we thought about that for a little bit, but then started to think, well, is it just innovation? And that's when our minds kind of went like this, and we started to zoom out a little bit and think, actually, this is strategy, and even when it comes to innovation, connecting to organizational, priorities and goals. There's, other departments struggle with that same problem too, right? When it comes especially to growth and change. So we started to look at some of the concepts that my co-founder was already building out, and we just had this light bulb moment that was also validated, in quite a few conversations, that there's actually a bigger problem here to solve that hasn't really been solved yet. And if we can, then of course the innovation sort of piece falls into line. But I think there's much greater potential, and you start to really think about possibilities, right, in terms of what can be done, and that's pretty exciting for us.
Okay, pretty cool. All right, so now that going back to the problem statement, if you will, or what you saw there, why do you think it's such a difficult job for leaders and executives to get everything aligned?
Yeah, I mean, how much time do you have? How much time? As part of this, I've done so much customer discovery. I've talked to hundreds of individuals, both at the leadership level as well as sort of the team lead level, as well as the staff level, the folks responsible for the execution. This is not a new problem. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like it's this the shocking thing. I think, in fact, most organizations know that they have some kind of issue when it comes to alignment. Alignment is also kind of a fancy word. Really, it's just like, how do we get everyone on the same page?
Right. Yeah.
Like rowing in the same direction. Like name your name your analogy, right? But that's what it is. And I think that it's been difficult to do, kind of for a lot of reasons. Why? So I'll start with why this happens. Why is it a struggle? And there's kind of three places that we're looking at least. The first is leadership. Oftentimes can't even get on the same page themselves about what the goals are. And again, this isn't every organization, right? Some are not a problem, but I would say for most, right, these issues sort of persist. So the first is, again, with leadership. Now, I just wrote a blog post today that sort of talked about this, and one of the pieces of research that I included in that came from a study that was done in 2020. So not new, but I would argue that it hasn't got any better. But in that study, it went out and talked to 21,000 individuals or leaders, inside of organizations, and basically it found out that when it comes to the CEO kind of saying what the strategy or what the goals are, only what was it? Like one in 33% or something of the leadership team actually sort of understood what and was aligned on what the priorities were. So think about that, right? Like you're a CEO or even a team lead. Say you manage a big team, and you go through all this effort, right, to think about the future, do what you do best. You're connecting pieces together, and then you sit your team down, and this could be over an hour, it could be days, and you say, this is where we want to go. This is what is important for us. These are the priorities. Now go. And this research is basically saying that a very small percentage, right? So less than the majority of the other leaders sort of come away then aligned. And that if not everybody is sort of aligned at the top, then how do you expect sort of the execution to happen, right, at the bottom? Also, what's interesting in the study that I did not write about, but there's also a finding about employee motivation as it relates to how well their boss is aligned with the strategy. That's pretty cool, right? So in other words, if you can get your leadership team more fully aligned, then the impact that could have on employee motivation and ultimately culture, could improve. I thought that was pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
So the second piece is staff alignment, right? So it's the next level down, and it could be level upon level right down, and obviously with each level it gets a little bit more tricky. I mean, this is like the telephone tag, right, problem, where it's like one person thinks that they said this, and then they tell it to this person, and that person thinks that they said that, and so on and so forth. But this is a very real thing, right, that is happening inside organizations. I think I shared this with you when we chatted a few weeks ago, but there was a Harvard Business Review study done in 22 or 23 that basically said their organization did this big offsite. Leadership, imagine the fireworks, right? This is the strategy. You've been in those things, and it's like, pumping everybody up, and it's a new year, and maybe they make some funny videos and this and that. They fly everybody in, to get everybody on the same page. Everybody leaves the next day, or whatever, a couple of days later. So you think with all that effort, time, and investment, right? That's a pretty good way to get everybody on the same page. But when in the study, everybody got back home, they surveyed each staff member and said, well, how do you think that you understand the strategy, right? And what do you think the percent was? Just take a guess. What percent of staff do you think answered yes or whatever?
10%.
I know I kind of led you in on that, but actually no. And that's what makes the study, to me, even more sort of interesting, is that it was like 80% of the staff said that they did understand the strategy, but when asked to write it down or try and communicate it, only 20% could. So 1 out of 5, right? So yeah, I mean, that's crazy, right? But I think it's the reality. We'll talk about why these problems, everybody knows this is still a problem, but why it persists, at least, some of my thoughts around that. But there's one more place, and that is what I'm calling sort of the line of sight, right? Line of sight to really understand how everybody's sort of work connects back to the corporate strategy or the corporate direction. And I've talked to, this is where sort of like every department, sort of matters, and really thinking about how everything sort of connects. And that's really hard to do. I mean, there's really, especially in large organizations, there's really nothing, no tool or, technology in place today that does that. But I've talked to product teams and product leaders, that really struggle with connecting their strategy back to what the corporate strategy is. And oftentimes, again, I wrote about this today, but they in one interview that I did, the product leader had to take it upon themselves to go to every single other department leader, and sit down with them and try and understand what they were working on, what their goals were, just to try and make sure that what they were working on sort of aligned with that, So, I mean, this is happening, right, in a lot of organizations. And I talk to, so many strategy experts or things like OKRs, experts that in those types of frameworks. And it's all the same thing. It's very difficult and I call it line of sight, because to really see all the way from the top down, but also the bottom up, how everything connects. And I think that's a big problem and a gnarly one. And that's why, we're at StratRocket trying to figure that out. Why has it persisted for so long? Why do we keep doing the offsites and the fireworks, and the rah, if we know that like people aren't going to be on the same page, right? And I think it's, I mean, look, everybody can have their own opinion, but some of the things I've looked at is, first of all, there hasn't really been a new way that has surfaced to do it, because I think it's so hard. It's a people issue, right? And it sort of falls in line with culture. Like if you have a culture problem, it's really hard there's not like one way to fix it, right? Or why is there a culture problem? Like it's complex. Which, by the way, I think sort of not being aligned does impact culture too. So if you look at the technologies or business technologies that have sort of surfaced over the last decade and have helped, helped with productivity or collaboration. I look at things like Slack or Teams, which is great for sharing information, but that if I was to share my business strategy with you on that, like, how do I know you really understand it? Like, I don't, it's sort of like seeing the head nod a little bit. It's not very interactive, and it's basically one way. It's written from my perspective. And you're reading it from my perspective. And I think we all know by now that's not always the best way to communicate.
Right.
Right. So I don't think, like, although those tools have generated tremendous value and solved so many problems, right? For a lot of organizations, they haven't really helped with the alignment issue. And then when you look at collaboration type tools like whiteboarding, or Trello, things like that, again, great for getting people kind of in one place to work on things, but it doesn't really help people get on the same page first, right? At least in my opinion. And so that's why we think what we're doing is kind of new, taking a brand new sort of, we're bringing something new to the market that sort of lives in that middle area, sort of, it's you could call it the Achilles heel of strategy. So it's not in the planning, it's not in the planning phase of things, and it's not in the execution. It's everything, in between. And again, that's really gnarly. And I think that's why it's been so difficult to solve. But going back to AI, I think it now does. AI offers some benefits that can help with some of the challenges that some of those challenges. So we can talk more about that too.
Yeah. So let's jump into the StratRocket, and if you can mention like how you solve some of these problems or all of those problems.
Yeah, well, look, we're still learning, right?
Yeah.
This is going to be a big thing, and it's going to take time, right? To iterate and learn and build and build and build to really solve this. But if we can, obviously the impact there to unlock so much value, but time saved, and higher execution, which means more growth, right? Is there? I mean, that's a ton of value. We're looking at three things really. One is enhancing clarity, right? So that can come at the leadership level first to make sure that leadership is aligned really on what the most important things are. And then also in terms of how you sort of cascade that down throughout the organization. And, I think in my previous answer, kind of talking about putting things in a way that others can understand. That's a big part of what we're working on, and I think is really important to that understanding piece. In some of my conversations, we've sort of thought about this in terms of the strategy coming to life in some ways, right? And that hasn't really been done before. You hear about strategy in a meeting, or many meetings, too many meetings, or a PowerPoint, but there's really no way to interact with it, And furthermore, have it kind of be told or translated into words you can understand and appreciate to help with that understanding. One of my favorite sort of, I don't know, you call it a tale or a story that I came across recently was kind of about these friends, and one lived in a remote area and, kind of no technology or anything like that. And another friend that lived in the city and decided one day to bring his friend a VCR, right, with all kinds of movies.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the story was told before the internet, but and was thinking, wow, my friend has nothing to do. I'm going to bring him a VCR, all these movies, so he can, intake like all of these great stories that are told through movies. And so he hands this thing off to his friend, leaves, comes back like a few weeks later, and sees the VCR still in the box, and he goes to his friend and he says, what's the deal? This is pretty cool. It's going to change your life. And the guy says something to the effect of, this thing doesn't tell stories in the way that I understand them or that I want to hear them. Right. And because in the village, everything is sort of spoken, in a unique way, and in a way that is personal, right, and relevant. Another way to sort of describe this is sort of the lens in which someone sees the company or the world. I mean, this is where we can get into some election stuff, right? But everybody has a different view or a lens. I like that lens. Whereas if you can just communicate or share something sort of in a way that respects the lens in which they see the world, or in a work environment, sort of maybe their team or their department, their function, they're going to have a much higher opportunity or sort of um, to understand what you're talking about.
Is it something like, some people more visual versus some people more like to read it and understand it? Some people like to watch a video or audio. Is that kind of related to this? How
So
to pass this message?
it could be, yeah, it could. I think when I hear that, I think of that as more of like modes of learning. I'm more interested in sort of modes of understanding,
Got it.
right?
Okay.
And so really it's as simple as me, if I want to tell you something, especially high level, that can be sort of bubbly or, I don't know, not maybe over detailed or not too much detail. And I say, okay, Vit, this is the plan. And I share that with you as I've written it through the lens that I see the company or my, perspective. Uh, you're not going to appreciate that as much as me writing it, thinking, well, where does Vit work in the company? What is Vit working on? Where does he sit in the organization? Is he a leader? Is he down here? Is he that? So that's one of the things that we're pursuing, is that sort of translation layer, if you will, that is oftentimes missing when it comes down to cascading goals down the organization. Is oftentimes they're top down, and again, you get the telephone tag thing, and we're going to eliminate all of that. It's going to come from the top, but then be sort of translated again, depending on where you work, what you're working on. And that's something that large language models are sort of designed to do, right? You type in one thing and you say, how would an engineer think about this? Or how would marketing write about it? So those capabilities are now there. We're just now sort of, right, packaging them up in a way that sort of combats that problem. So that's the clarity piece. The other piece is participation, right?
Okay.
So going back to the top-down nature of strategy, oftentimes it limits the participation of staff, right? To be a part of that, and so by the time it gets to them, it's kind of like, well, what are you gonna do to do this? And this was an important lesson that I learned sort of in my innovation work, was if you give staff or employees the opportunity to participate, then ultimately it leads to better outcomes, right? Because they have their own perspectives. They're the ones actually doing the work. They were there the year before when they learned this and that, or we failed, right? Like they have all that learning. And so we're taking, I would say, kind of a novel approach. I think it's something that every company wants to do, but again, is difficult until now, where you can express the goals, right? Going back to the clarity, come up with what those priorities are. Another term we're using is sort of publish the goals down, right, to each department. Translate those goals in a way for everybody, each individual to understand, depending on, again, various factors. But then asking staff well, how do you think we can reach this goal? What does the strategy look like from your perspective? And that could be something they're already working on, or it could be a new idea, or this or that. And then what we're doing is making sure that all of those things are aligned, right, back to the goal. And this is sort of where we get into some of the making sure what everybody is working on, right, is at the end of the day aligned, and that goes back to the line of sight thing, as well. Yeah, and then the last piece I just kind of touched on that, but again, making sure that the things that everybody is working on, right, are aligned, and that's difficult. That's difficult to do with sort of the silo problem that exists inside of organizations, and or it's something that we're looking at.
Okay. So then you also mentioned something about like most companies use this traditional planning cycle. What we have, many people maybe have different understanding, but it may be kind of like standard waterfall project management. Maybe some of them using agile practices. And then you're saying that the tool will embrace the continuous execution. Can you speak to that and explain how it does it?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and and this is kind of where I like to look out into the future. And I think the things that you read about, most people read about with regards to AI today, are somewhat superficial and sort of just scratching the surface in terms of impact. Um, I am of the belief that AI can sort of, again, reduce a lot of the friction and busy work that that a lot of employees are stuck with, and that will actually elevate and create more opportunities for more people to participate in things like strategy. That's number one, which will be, think about that, right? And then we'll need tools to support that, which is where StratRocket comes into play. But I think another area is we'll look back, let's say a couple years from now, we'll look back and why do we plan? Why do annual and quarterly planning cycles exist? Why? Right? Like as we sort of grow and go through evolutions, we always look back on things and say, well, why did we do that? And I think that for me, the easy answer is constraint. Part of the constraint is just depending on how big your organization is, you can only focus on so many things at once, right? So maybe that's once a year or every quarter. But I think part of the constraint is also, I'll say, technology, which could be AI, right? Used in a manner that can help with getting everybody on the same page. And if you can have everybody on the same page, to me, that means acceleration. It means you can get more done faster. You can run more experiments. Maybe that means you're failing faster too, right? But if you don't have everybody on the same page, it's sort of like you could have a Ferrari, right? But if you have like a flat tire, you're not going to go that fast. And I think that is the reality for most organizations, and this is where we get into some of the culture stuff too. But the apparatus just isn't there to really facilitate anything faster than annual or quarterly. Now, so I believe that we've held on to those models as a result of these constraints. Once tools like StratRocket come to market, and I think it's just something you have to see, I think it will then sort of open up the possibilities. And leaders, just like when the iPhone came out, it's like, well, who knew anything about touchscreens, right? Like, and the impact that would have on our lives. But once it came out, then everybody started to think, oh, I could do this with that. I could do this. I could do so much more. I could be more productive and this and that. I think it's going to be the same thing with tools like StratRocket. Again, we're going to look back and say, why did we ever do strategy like that? Like we moved so slow. And obviously that ties into this story about sort of or not the story, but the reality of the pace of innovation, right? And change is happening quicker and faster, by the day. So how do you keep up with that? Well, it makes sense that the organizations that are more aligned or on the same page will be able to execute faster. And by the way, that doesn't mean good execution. It could mean you fail. That's okay, but it means you're going to learn quicker from that, iterate, get
Mm-hmm.
back up, and do the next thing. So that's really fascinating to me.
Okay. So it's some sort of connection, I guess, between the strategy to the actual day-to-day tasks that people do and teams do, and somehow like optimizing their workflow. If we're going away from annual and quarterly plannings, if you will, uh, I guess the tool will somehow help them streamline all that work, finish sooner, grab something else, and if you get in delays or anything, it will just monitor and mention that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's an area we're still looking at. But
Okay.
part of what we know is needed when it comes to, so there's a few ways of looking at this, but there's, when you think of strategy, you can think of it in terms of the how, sort the why and the how, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we can get everybody aligned on the why, then we can spend more time on the how. To me, the why is sort of the goals for the priorities, like the four things that we want to focus on right now. The how is, okay, how are you going to do it? And that's sort of where the, strategies sort of begin to surface and with StratRocket, get aligned with that. The next step is, well, what needs to be done then, right, to then execute on the strategy. And this is also sort of a point of failure and also misalignment for a lot of organizations. So you could have the best strategy, in the world, or best component of a strategy or best idea, and then you just sort of jump into it, but you may not think it through, right? And it's difficult for any one person, maybe in this part of the organization, to really have a full perspective on what is it going to take. What are the risks, or what are the success factors? What are the resources? Like, there's a lot of insight right there that is oftentimes missing when these strategies are sort of green lit. And so when I talk about sort of that as the third piece to the the puzzle, it's helping those teams start to get a head start on thinking what those things are, and they can put in their own thoughts or edit that or whatever, right? But it's just surfacing those things to get the brain going and get others, sort of involved. We think will create, more alignment, sort of better sign off, if you will, before those chores or those tasks go off into, let's say, a project management solution or something like that, where the actual work is being done. But yeah, we're looking at things like, anytime something seems to be off, like there should be a big red light that is flashing,
Mm-hmm.
for you to go in and see, okay, where did we get out of alignment? And again, that's really hard to do today, and oftentimes goes left undiscovered, for months or quarters or years, believe it or not. And so if we can accelerate that type of, again, sort of, insight,
Yeah.
then it helps with everything.
So this is an AI native platform that you're building. Um, and the hope is the AI will automate a lot and help a lot with this translation piece, right? The communication. Um, how else are you using AI, and what do you think it will, help you with the most?
Yeah. So first of all, from a technology perspective, we're we're building it in a way where we can be sort of flexible with what AI, right?
Mm,
And I think that's important because who knows what the future will bring, and so we're looking at things like security or stability, and performance and things like that. Um, so those things are top of mind. In terms of the application of it, you mentioned some of the translation stuff that is pretty neat. Um, On top of that, it's it's you know we're looking at helping to articulate or sort of get, like, have you ever gone to bed and you're like, I think I have this nugget of an idea, but I don't really know what it is, or maybe a few things going on there, and we want to help sort of draw that out, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And I think oftentimes that's, it's rare where you have like the perfect clear sense as to like what the idea is or what the answer is. And so if you could just sort of, you know, input, uh, sort of tidbits, right? Or little breadcrumbs, if you will, kind of around what your thoughts are, then, and we can then sort of take that and start to sort of accelerate, well, this is what it could be. Is this what you're talking about? And then you could share that with someone and get their thoughts on that or whatnot. Then again, it's sort of, so it's some of the creativity aspects of when it comes to thinking about, goals or even strategies. That's again, that was a big barrier that I saw in the innovation space. Was, you go out to staff and you ask, well, what are your ideas? And some people just know, right? Like the ideators, they're thinking about ideas all the time, but others, they might just have an insight or something like that. And so we want to capture everything and make sure that everybody has that opportunity to participate. It kind of goes back to the engagement piece. So we're looking at doing that at various points again in the system, and other exciting things too, which are still sort of in development. But basically, it all comes back to those. You look at the points where the misalignment occurs, and we're looking at each point, and we're asking ourselves, how do we tackle that, right? In some sort of a systematic workflow. I think it has to start with goals,
Mm-hmm.
and then strategies, and then we're calling it tasks, right? But sort of the chores that needed to actually execute on the strategy. And you know, you could probably on your own think of some of the complexity sort of along that workflow where you could think about leveraging AI in some ways.
You mentioned a few kind of insights that the tool can generate, like red flags if something gets stuck, or maybe helping clarify things in communication. What are some other insights? Is it like reports that you build in or some sort of notifications that
Yeah.
the tool has capabilities of? If you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it's important to know that things are still early, right? So we're going to learn a lot from. We have a great group of beta customers about to come,
Yeah.
online, and we're going to learn a lot about them and learn a lot about what we're doing too. I think alerts are important, and so we figure out the best way to deliver those. But that's part of the plan. Um, I won't, I can't say too much, but I'll say that one of the more fascinating areas of when I look at sort of the potential, right, goes back to that engagement piece and bringing strategy to life. You know, in like when again, I just think of like strategy on a PowerPoint. It's static, and you can't really interact with it. But if you could, what would you ask it, right?
Hmm.
Pretty interesting. Um, and then what might a leader, how much value might there be in a leader then to sort of know that some teams are interacting, at a higher level with the strategy than others? And furthermore, would that then sort of indicate higher likely, like better performance? So if we can start to, you know, if we can do that, then again, think of the the power in that for leaders to the insight right there to know more about their business and how to, at the end of the day, execute better, which it means more growth or impact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are you already getting any feedback from your beta users, or is it still like pre-launch time? I know you're still continuously working in developing this tool. I'm just
Yeah, I'll tell you
curious.
this. Yeah, I'll tell you this. We've got spent a lot of time getting feedback in various ways, just like any startup, right? Um, and some of that, we even had an MVP right before
Yeah,
the beta.
sure.
So
Mm-hmm.
we were out, in the market talking to people about that and showing a little bit of that. Um, one of the one conversation I'll never forget was actually, I don't know if I should say, but it's a large software company, and it was a company that um, has a mix of new products as well as old. And depending on what team you work on, you could be part of the new exciting stuff, or maybe you're just you're just managing the old stuff, not as exciting. And when we started to sort of express or demonstrate some of the concepts around like the engagement side of things, like the participation,
Mm-hmm.
um, well, there was so this interview in particular really stuck out to me because she said, what you're really doing is making strategy at that time it was innovation, but still strategy more sort of more accessible to everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
Inside of the organization. You don't have to be on part of the strategy team or part of the exciting new project, right? To participate in strategy. No, you can still be working on a legacy product. And if your boss is taking the time to sort of, you know, uh, establish what the priorities are, and then StratRocket is helping to clarify those in a way that every team member can
Mm-hmm.
can understand, and then go back and say, hey, we want your help. Like we want you to participate in the direction in areas sort of in the pursuit, right? Is extremely empowering. And it means you don't have to work on the new flashy projects anymore to have sort of that level of strategic engagement, right, inside of the company. And I think too, in so many of these conversations, that it comes down to culture at the
Yeah.
end of the day. Like I
Yeah.
think that I'm convinced that alignment and culture are pretty intertwined, right?
Yeah.
Now, just going after the culture issue again is really messy, and it happens for a lot of different reasons. But one of the reasons I'm doing this is because if you can improve the alignment piece, I know that will improve culture. And at the end of the day, like that's good for everybody. I think in this day and age, people want to show up to work, feel good about what they're working on. They want to feel like, their
Yeah. Yeah.
contributions are meaningful, and they want to have a say. And, it's coming. So it's gonna be exciting.
Yeah, it's actually very interesting what you just said because I hear this and actually experienced it myself a few times when, um, especially if you're working on legacy systems in maintenance mode, that stuff is invisible to anybody. Everybody think that you like sitting somewhere in a corner doing something. Nobody cares about this work, but that person actually does important job because that product brings money to the organization or whatever. So it's important to tie it back to the goals and strategy and show to the leadership like, no, this is an important work. This person actually making a difference. So I think if that's the shift that will create that visibility, that would be great because many people even live in organizations if they are not getting a little bit of credit for what they're doing. Like forget about salary, just like appreciation, right? When talking to leaders and your team leads, and if they say you're doing a great job and we notice and it's actually hitting that goal, that's all people, you know, that's when they start shining.
Yeah, it's basic stuff, right? We're all humans at the end of the
Right.
day. We all have these basic needs, but I think sometimes, right in the workplace, it gets messy.
Yeah.
And so, let's fix it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you fixing it, so we'll wait.
Yeah.
um, okay. So yeah, we're coming to the end here, and that's a great conversation and explanation of what you're doing. Do you have any final advice for people, like if they don't have this tool yet, they will in the future, of course. But right now, is there anything like top of the mind, couple of things that they can fix right now in terms of their teams and alignment and strategy and things like that?
Yeah, I think one thing that again came out for me in a lot of these interviews was I'm blanking on the term, but it was a great term. I have to figure it out. But it came from uh, a very sort of uh, strategy sort of expert. He's working at a big financial institution, helping his whole job is to connect right strategy, corporate strategy down to the
Mm-hmm.
teams. And yeah, he put out this great piece. I think it was on LinkedIn that resonated with me, and he said, and I think this will be helpful, right, to some of your listeners, that um, he said something like there the way that you execute on strategy may not be what you want, but there is sort of an approach, right? There's an established approach inside of the organization when it comes to executing on strategy or aligning, making decisions right at the end of the day. And he basically said, the first step is to go figure that out. I forget the name. He's like shadow strategy or something like that, right? But there is something in place, even if you think there's not. People inside the organization are making decisions today uh, because of some reason, right? And if you can get to the bottom of that, well, then that's the strategy that's in place, and then you know sort of where to begin to start to change things. So I totally botched that, but I can get you the link to that. But I thought it was really interesting, and could be a good way for leaders to start is just figure out, well, how are we making decisions today,
Mm-hmm.
and it's decisions like everyday people, sort of like every not just leaders but staff even. Why did you decide to do this versus that? Well, that's kind of goes back to culture too, but figure that out first, and then you can work to improve that.
Yeah. Okay. That's great.
Yeah,
Yeah. One step at a time, right?
yeah,
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, Josh, for your time today. We'll wait for the tool, and if you give me the links, I'll put them
yeah.
to description so people can go and join that wait list and give you feedback and things like that. Um, so
Sounds good, Vit. Yeah, I was just gonna say if anybody's listening and they're excited kind of about some of these concepts, and you wanna test them out, right? You want to kind of be first in line. Reach out, right? Go to StratRocket.com, click on the join the waitlist button. We're looking at that list now, starting to sort of onboard, right, folks. And we're looking again for, people that see that a similar vision, that know that change is possible and want that for that themselves, their leaders in their organization.
mhm,
Come collaborate with us, be a part of what we're doing, and help us build this, thing. It's still early. I think we've, got off to a great start. My co-founder John is incredible, and um, but we need other people. So reach
yeah.
out and let's talk.
All right. Great. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
And we'll talk
Yeah,
again soon.
yeah. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. Take care.